Welcome back to the news today. During the ongoing wave of terror in Israel and the West Bank, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly blamed the violence on official Palestinian incitement. But according to a new study by COGAT, which is responsible for coordinating government activities in the Palestinian territories, so-called lone wolf attackers are fueled not only by social media or religion, but also by familial and other personal problems. Here with me to discuss further are Dr. Hani Zubeira, Chair of the Political Science Department at the Israel Valley Academic College. Good evening.
Good evening, Ayman.
And Defense Correspondent for I-24 News, Shai Ben-Ari. Good evening,
yes,
Shai.
Good evening, Ayman.
Well, Dr. Zubeira, this is not new. This profile of the low-income, disenfranchised terrorists is something that we heard of before, certainly with the Paris attacks, where they were, some of them, sons of immigrants. Is the IDF just finding out about this?
Well, they're not just finding out about this, but I'd like to beg the differ with the notion of the lone wolf. This is not a lone wolf attack. Lone wolf means that somebody had a certain notion of ideology cultivation within his culture, and through this ideology he detached himself from society, and due to that ideology he decided to eventually resort to political violence, which was in the form of terror. This is not the case. These people do not have ideology. They were not or never belonged to any faction of a terrorist organization. They were not trained, nothing of that sort. This is not terror. Well, the usual terrorism that we're used to. This has a completely different notion. These people never met Jews, period. The only encounter they had with Jews had to do either with the color green or with the color blue, military or police. These people think that all Israelis and all Israeli Jews look the same. They are military or police personnel, and they are the occupiers. As a result, they resort to this kind of like cognitive dissonance in which they are detached from their own society because of the zero hope that they see in their homes, and eventually resort to violence. Now, while we can talk about it as much as we want, the officials are now literally saying we cannot do anything about it because there is no way we can trace them to begin with and then have some preventive measures to stop them, because there's nothing to indicate who the next person is. And let me remind you, the last person we talked about in this really horrible murder is a 15-year-old child. Mm-hmm. For a 15-year-old child to take a knife, go into a different settlement of Jews and stab a woman,
of course.
Exactly. There has to be some sort of a complete break from reality. And this is what I think. And I'm not trying to come up with excuses to the matter, but the fact is that today the IDF literally told us we have no solution for that.
Well, Shai, this is a very good point, and it sounds like a dramatic challenge for the IDF. Yeah. We know on the military front what they can do to apprehend the assailants after they commit a terror attack. But how can the IDF deal with so-called lone wolf attackers if they are motivated by, as the report says, familial and social problems?
The IDF and also the Israeli government basically admit they don't have a solution at this stage. The Prime Minister has said as much. He basically has called for a sort of stiff upper lip in another sort of attempt to paraphrase Churchill. And also even the Chief of Staff, Eisenkot, admitted a few days ago that most of these attacks, they have any sort of indication beforehand. And indeed, you can't talk about any sort of organization. You could perhaps talk about it in terms of a class of people. And it's interesting to note that when these youths do find themselves in the prison system, after all, in the Israeli prison system, you have a division amongst an organizational division, let's say, in the prison system itself, where Hamas people stay together and Islamic Jihad and so forth. These people are actually find themselves in their own section titled National Union, interestingly. They do perhaps group together in that sense when they are forced to group together, but indeed we are talking about a certain rejectionism. They reject Fatah, they reject Hamas, they reject all sorts of movements, but that does not mean that they're not susceptible to certain ideas, because first of all, you talk about IS and its let's say influence on what's going on in terms of discourse in the West Bank and really in all Muslim societies these days. that is an organization that rejects all others. And therefore, I think people who find themselves in this kind of situation where they are basically rejecting, they find themselves susceptible to those ideas.
And Dr. Zubeira, it seems like this theory would present a catch-22 for Israel. There are those who say that the reason for these familial ties, the reason for these social problems is the military rule in the Palestinian territories anyway, and it's that very rule that causes these social problems that in turn cause terrorism. Are we expected to see a battle between the IDF and the government when it comes to how they profile these terrorists and what motivates them?
Well, I think the catch-22 over here is literally visible and extremely easy to solve. First thing first, I think that Israel will have to reconsider the A, B, and C division within the Palestinian Authority, especially the blockades. Israel has to rethink the way the encounter between the local population and the military is right now being handled. We know this is a major friction point. We know the Palestinians are suffering over there. This has to be rethought. Secondly, I think that the Chief of Staff, Eisenkot, said that in a not so subtle way. He said, we, the military, do not have the tools to deal with this type of action. We need you, the politicians, to solve this for us, because we cannot, one, educate people, two, make connections between people, three, humanize or dehumanize people. You need to take action. He said, we have nothing to do with those people. Now, the fact of the matter is that literally when they go into prison, they're being indoctrinated into various factions. Most of them find themselves isolated, but when they come out of the prison, they're not the same people that went into prison. And on that exact same issue, other people who see them in prison will start to enact in the same way because they're detached from their families, brothers, uncles, nephews, and so on and so forth. Now, the thing is, this has no military solution. Forget about it. Anyone who talks about military solution to this type of problem is literally throwing sand in the eyes of the public. This needs to be answered politically with money investments and changing the entire infrastructure of the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people in the West Bank.
Well, Shai, no military solution, Dr. Hani Zubeira tells us, but one of the most difficult things that we've discussed here with you often in the studio is profiling these lone wolf attackers. Will this report in any way make a difference?
I don't think it really allows the army to be able to approach this subject much better or much more effectively. Again, I think I agree it's really a political problem, and then you have to think about how do you solve this, really. We're talking about divisions, we're talking about separation, we're talking about a situation where Israeli and Palestinian youths don't really get a chance to interact with each other. That doesn't necessarily happen later on. Sometimes when Palestinians grow older, they need to get a job, and they find themselves often working in Israeli communities. But you have a problem when you're talking about these kinds of youths who are old enough to carry a knife and carry out an attack, but they're perhaps not old enough to work amongst Israelis and begin that sort of interaction which perhaps can humanize them in a sense and prevent this kind of attack. But also when you talk about incitement in general, it does exist. You know, Army Radio, when they referred to this report, they actually interpreted it in a way where they saw that the study finds that personal and familial problems are perhaps more significant than incitement. Now, when we talked to Kogat themselves, they backed off from the interpretation, basically saying it was wrong. And of course, that's a rather heated sort of comment to make, because of course the Prime Minister himself says almost on a daily basis that incitement is the major problem. And incitement does exist. It's in the discourse, but not necessarily incitement that Netanyahu is talking about. You're often seeing incitement on a personal level on Facebook. Perhaps someone dies, a friend of theirs makes a comment on Facebook, and another person is incited to carry out an attack.
And Dr. Zubeira, just briefly on the point of incitement, is there a point to be made about education here too?
Obviously, yeah, I agree fully. I think there is incitement. We cannot take it out of the equation. But the incitement did not start a week ago and neither a year ago. The incitement started immediately after Israel occupied the territories. Of course, they're occupied people, they're oppressed. They would like to become free people. They would like their own nation. And now, on the other hand, the oppression just grows and grows. I think everything resorts to the fact that if we are reasonable people, we do all agree it has nothing to do with a military solution. period. It has everything to do with the political solution.
If we are reasonable people.
If we are reasonable people.
Very, very interesting preface indeed. Dr. Hani Zubeira and Shai Ben-Ari, thank you very much for joining me in this debate tonight. And now, legendary singer and composer Ariel Zilber was awarded the 2016 Lifetime Achievement Prize by the Israeli Union of Performing Artists. He was due to receive the honor in 2014, but was refused because of his radical political views. I-24 News correspondent Shani Nachshoni has more.
Ariel Zilber, the Israeli singer who was a big rock star between the 70s and the 90s before becoming religious and radical in his political views, was named Wednesday as a recipient of a Life Achievement Award by IUPA, the Israeli Union of Performing Artists, an awarding that drawn a lot of criticism. Since his radicalization, he has called for the release of Yigal Amir, the murderer of former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and talked harshly against gays, left-wingers and Arabs. In 2006, he even wrote the music for the election announcement of the far-right politician Baruch Marzel, who is a well-known activist of the extremist nationalist Meir Kahane movement. He supports deporting Arabs from Israel and aspires to found a state based on Jewish laws and the Sanhedrin, the biblical Jewish court. On 2014, Akum, the Society of Authors, Composers and Music Publishers in Israel, was supposed to award the singer for his life's achievement, and after a protest started by international singer Noah, the definition of the award changed to Contribution to Israeli Music. One of those opposed was Dalia Rabin, the daughter of late Prime Minister, who is a director at Akum.
I get the feeling that I'm the punching bag for interested groups, frustrated artists that try again and again to invent my extremism. In the decision the members of the directorate made, they are denying the artist's right to have an opinion, and they're detaching the songs from their creators.
Choosing Zilber for this award opened a discussion in Israel whether an artist can be denied an award over his political views, regardless of his artistic contribution.
At the beginning, I thought it's just the directorate, and then I discovered that Akum's CEO, Yurik Ben David, said that he doesn't think it's wrong to reject a person over his political views. So I said, Akum shouldn't exist. I would have cancelled Akum today and rebuilt it as a place that is open to every opinion.
Both in 2014 and now, the award committee members agreed that Zilber is a great artist and has made a meaningful contribution to Israeli culture. The ceremony is due to take place on February 17th.
Certainly a decision that's more than likely to stir controversy. But joining me in the studio now is Shani Nachshoni, our I-24 News correspondent. Good evening, Shani.
Good evening, Ayman.
Shani, just a few days ago we discussed the Oscars So White movement, and today you're here to tell us there are new arrivals to this movement.
So before we're going to talk about the African American that joined the protest, I just want to mention George Clooney, who gave an exclusive interview to Variety, and he said that Hollywood is marching backwards instead of forwards. And 10 years ago, things looked better for minorities, for women, for African Americans, for Hispanic people. And now you can see that in a second year in a row, the 20 major spots for actors and actresses are all white nominees, and so this is George Clooney saying that this protest is right. Plus, director Spike Lee, he's saying that he's not going to come to the ceremony, but on Good Morning America, he said, I never said the word boycott, so I'm not boycotting the ceremony. I'm going to a game to see the Knicks game, if I'm not mistaken. But he said that he wouldn't judge Chris Rock, and whatever decision he will make, he'll accept it, and he loves him and wish him all well.
So he's taking a step back, but you know who I hope to see in the ceremony? It's the cast of Friends. And you have news of a program that might make this happen, the reboot of Friends?
A Scottish animator, his name is Andy Pandy, that's his name on Twitter, actually. He created a generator of intelligence, artificial intelligence, that he took the old scripts of the Friends show and made her make a new one according to these old scripts. So in the new episode that this program created, there are funny things and are pretty bizarre. For example, Chandler is saying that he is going to propose to his shoe, and Monica is saying that she hates men and she's going to go to Minsk. And he published those scripts on Twitter. It's very funny. If you want to go and check, it's Andy Pendy on Twitter.
And briefly, you have news from my favorite publication, Vogue.
Yes, of course. So the Vogue cover shows us that Zoolander is approaching. The release of Zoolander is expected on February, and on the cover we already saw the world's most famous male model with Penelope Cruz. And I think there's only one thing that is appropriate to do for the end of this edition, and it's the blue steel look. Do you know how to?
Of course. I just
Yes?
wonder why it took so long for him to get to Vogue. Shani Nakhshoni, thank you very much
Can
for
I do
that
the blue
tonight.
steel thing?
You can do the blue steel as we go on break. That's Shani Nakhshoni doing blue steel, and that concludes the news today. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow. Be with us then too. Good night.